Right now, I'm interviewing by way of telephone legendary investor and financial analyst Jim Rogers. Jim, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, Dan, I'm delighted to be here.
As you know, this show is geared towards the young generation in America and abroad, and I just recently learned that you have a book out that you wrote for your two daughters called A Gift to My Children. It describes what you've learned through the years of your successful career as an investor and also gives valuable insight about life in general. It's clear to me that the young and old alike could benefit from the lessons of life that you've written about. But first, let's start with a little of your background. I know that you're an American, and a couple years ago you moved to Singapore to live there with your family. Is that correct?
That is, in fact, I am an American citizen, taxpayer, and voter. But in 2007, we moved to Singapore to further my children's education. I want them to grow up speaking perfect Mandarin and knowing Asia.
That's what I assumed. A big motivation for moving was so that your children could speak Chinese. Could you tell us more about that?
Well, in my view, Dan, the 21st century will be the century of China and of Asia. The 19th century was the century of the UK. The 20th century was the century of the US. 21st century is going to be the century of China. My daughters were born in 2003 and 2008, and I want them to speak perfect Mandarin. I'm trying to prepare them for the 21st century.
Hmm. Taking your family to Singapore to immerse your children in Chinese is a really proactive approach to your children's education. But there are other major languages in the world too, and from what you know about the world of finance, what are the most important languages for young people to learn?
Well, I suspect any children who arrive in the 21st century should know Mandarin, English, and Spanish. I think if you know those three languages, you've got pretty much the whole world covered, or can cover the whole world.
You didn't mention Portuguese. Why is that?
Well, Portuguese is fine, but Spanish is a Romance language, much more so than Portuguese. And if you can speak Spanish, you can get along in French and Italian and some of the other languages. Portuguese is not so all-encompassing as is Spanish. Once the commodities bull market ends in a few years, Brazil will probably go back to its same old way of being a problem again.
It's funny that we're talking about Spanish and Portuguese in this interview. I'm now in the U.S., but until recently I was living near the border of Colombia and Brazil, and I met someone there who spoke 7 languages. Throughout his life, he always thought that he would be a CEO of a big company because of his language education. But in the end, his career never took off. And I learned something from that, which is language skills and specializing in something go together. So let's talk about picking a field of study. You recommend finding jobs in agriculture and staying away from finance. So in simple terms, why do you recommend staying away from finance?
Well, that's for the next 20 or 30 years. Finance is going to be a difficult area. We've had long periods in history when financial types were the masters of the universe, followed by long periods when people who produce real goods were the masters, the farmers, the miners, the lumberjacks, etc. We had 30 years, the 80s, 90s, and the first part of this decade when finance was booming, but that's finished. In 1958, America graduated 5,000 MBAs, and the world graduated none. Last year in America, we graduated 200,000 MBAs, and the rest of the world graduated tens of thousands more. So you have staggering competition in finance now, at a time when there's staggering debt in finance, and, of course, governments worldwide are coming down on bankers, brokers, etc. The main thing one has to know, especially if you're young, is to follow your own passions. Don't do what I say or somebody you see in the press, on TV. You got to follow your own passion, and that's how you're going to be successful, and if not successful, at least happy. The people who follow their own loves never go to work, Dan. They wake up every morning and start having fun. They can hardly wait for the day to begin because they're so excited. Those are the people who become successful and, as I say, at least happy. And if you want to be a gardener, you go ahead and be a gardener, because someday you're going to be the gardener for the White House and someday you're going to have a chain of garden shops around the world, and someday you're going to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and everybody you know is always going to say, oh, we knew you would be a good gardener. That's why we thought you should do it. So follow your own passions. That's the most important point of all.
Well, what you're saying leads us to an issue that needs to be addressed. The problem is that for some jobs that people love, it might take years or even a decade to live comfortably. So for young people, do you recommend having a plan B?
No, I recommend that you stay with plan A, because even if you don't do well for a decade, then a decade is nothing in somebody's successful lifetime. Let's assume you have 40 years of a career. Well, if you become the CEO of a large company listed on the New York Stock Exchange in your 50s, that's a pretty successful life, even if you had to struggle for the first 10 years or so. Look at all the actors and musicians and sports figures who have to struggle in the beginning. Writers, if they stay with what they love, they eventually make huge amounts of money and are very successful. So, no, I would stay with plan A. If you got to have a plan B, then of course you go to a sector where there's prosperity. But like I said before, I went into finance in the mid-'60s when Wall Street was a backwater. Nobody went to Wall Street in the 60s. But since I loved it so much, I spent 15 years there during a horrible period in finance, but I came out and was pretty successful despite the horrible period.
Point well taken. And what I'd really like to talk about now is the difference between the work ethic of Asians and Americans. With brutal honesty, what have you noticed about this difference?
As far as the work ethic in Asia, Dan, I mean, it's embarrassing to have to say, but there is not much of a work ethic in the U.S. anymore. Most of the work ethic that does exist seems to be with immigrants in the U.S., but in Asia, everybody's working from dawn to dusk. Everybody's, saving and investing as much as they can. In Asia, they don't say how many days holiday do I get when they come to work. They say how many days can I come to work. They all want to work. They all want to get successful. They know how we live in the developed world, and they want to live that way too.
So when they come to the U.S., they find a system that's ready for them to succeed. We have a good system here, but I guess the problem is that Americans are spoiled, and we don't have the same drive as the immigrants.
Most immigrants who come to the U.S. too are better educated. The school systems in Asia certainly are much better than the schools in the U.S. And the Asian kids are always winning the international contests. They take national tests, and the Asians come out on top. In Asia, you are not taught self-esteem, Dan. You have to earn self-esteem. In America, unfortunately, we're still trying to teach people to have self-esteem. That's not the way to get successful.
Well, we know it's true, and it has to be said. And since we're talking about education, let's continue with that. What do you think about people choosing between universities? There are famous universities with high tuition and not so famous universities that are more affordable. It seems like in everyone's mind the best thing to do is to get into an Ivy League university because they want the best opportunities. What's your opinion about that?
Well, I went to an Ivy League university and had a wonderful, wonderful time and loved it. But I also know that many of the people who went to the same university with me didn't turn out terribly successful. People are going to be successful no matter where they go to school. You can go to the local junior college, and if you've got the drive and the brains and the persistence is perhaps among the most important attributes, you're going to do well no matter what. So going to a fancy university will get you into the first job or two or three, but after that, Dan, it's really up to you. After you start producing or not producing, that determines your success, not your school.
You frequently recommend investing in agriculture. Do you mean finding good agricultural stocks when you advise that?
Well, it depends on everybody's own expertise and desires. The best thing to do is to become a farmer or to buy farmland and rent it out to good farmers. Or you can buy agricultural products such as, wheat or corn or cotton, whatever, if you know something about them. If you don't want to become a farmer, you can go into the farm district and service them. I mean, if you have restaurants in the farm areas, you're going to make a lot of money if you sell tractors or seed or fertilizer, if you sell insurance. in the farming areas, you're going to make a lot of money because the farmers are going to have the money. If you want to have the Lamborghini dealership, have it in the farm district, not in the stockbrokers district. So that's where the money's going to be. You could invest in agricultural countries. If you want to invest in, Canada or Brazil or Argentina or Australia, those are countries which have a lot of agriculture, and those economies are going to do better than the ones that don't have agriculture. If you're going to buy a second home in the U.S., buy it in Iowa. Don't buy it in Massachusetts because the farmers are going to have the money. The stockbrokers are not. The stockbrokers are going to be driving taxis. The smart ones will learn how to drive tractors so they can work for the farmers.